Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm just going to start with a few introductions and then we'll get going. My name's Dave Epstein. I am the managing principal at TruexCullins. With me is Sean McMannon, superintendent of Williston. Great start, Dave. Winooski Schools. And also on the line are some people from our team, Cam Featherstonhoff and Stefan Poston and Tracy Dengler, who is kind of running the show here from our marketing department. So I just wanted to say, you know, we're not coming to you as experts in DEI. We really want to share our experiences and our learning and also learn from you as we present. I think as you got logged on, this is being recorded. So if you want to share this with other people, we'll make that available. But you know, we're all on this journey together, trying to understand how to make our schools more inclusive, more equitable. And this is just part of what we hope is a hopeful conversation, and well, a helpful conversation, I should say. So let's move on to the next slide. If I can figure out how to do that. Here we go. Oh, there we go. So, sorry.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Happy February. Hope you're staying warm, getting ready for the cold bomb tonight. And I just wanted to start off and give a little context. I think many of you kind of on the Zoom know about Winooski, but we are fairly unique in many ways in the state of Vermont. We have a single facility, 850 students, pre-K-12. As I think you all know, we are Winooski has a long history of being an immigrant and refugee resettlement area, from the French Canadians all the way up to recent Congolese settlement. And with some of that, and also with being a kind of a concentration of affordable housing, comes high levels of poverty and trauma. We have 20 languages spoken is a little bit of a misnomer. If you count dialects, that's true, but we have primarily 8 or 9 languages that we most frequently interpret and translate a lot of our work into. We have 7 full-time multilingual liaisons who speak a lot of different languages, and they are just absolutely essential and like gold to our work with the community. And as you'll see as we go throughout, the incorporation of all of the different layers of support services for the varying student needs are incorporated into the visioning, the design, and the actualization of the renovation and new build, including multilingual, special education, health needs, and so forth.
Great, thanks, Sean. Just a little bit about TruexCullins. We're an architecture and interior design firm in Burlington with a staff of about 35. We have an education studio that focuses on pre-K through 12, American international schools, and colleges and universities. We work with a lot of schools, a lot of districts in Vermont, and we're really, this project that we're going to share was really a juicy one in terms of, really transformational and how the approach and the result. So I want to talk a little bit about the presentation. First, we want to talk about the context. Context being both, what's your personal experience that you bring to the table, but also what's the cultural context that we're working in, and how it is specific. It's kind of it's like asking the fish, how's the water? But we need to really step back and look at what is the context we're working in, so we can understand how it may or may not meet the needs of everybody, all the stakeholders. And then we want to talk about some process issues that we experienced that some that worked well, others that didn't. And then finally, the design itself. How do you design a building that promotes inclusivity and equity? And then we'll have some times for Q&A at the end, we hope. Please use the chat. We're going to have some prompts on the slides, and if you'd like to respond to those prompts in the chat, Tracy will monitor those and maybe read some of those out as we go. So, and we'll let you know when the prompts come up.
Yeah, so we chose to put this slide in to give folks some things to consider. At the outset of a project, it's really important to kind of think about who you are and who the people are who have authority and power, making decisions from start to finish in a project like this. And in our state, second whitest state in the country, that tends to be white people. And it tends to be white people of middle upper class. And so, there's some bullets here to kind of check some assumptions of things that we take for granted, but I think it's really, really important to figure out mechanisms from the very beginning of how you're going to engage all different folks who are vested in the project. And so you can hear from folks so you don't take anything for granted along the way, and that you have a really robust, kind of radically inclusive process. And this is in no way kind of a shot at any of us. It's we all come with our own backgrounds, biases, and experiences, and they can never be all encompassing. And there's so much to be learned from others and to be gained from having such various representation throughout projects like this.
And Sean was talking about like some of the personal experiences that we might have or things we take for granted. And then there's also the cultural characteristics. This is from white supremacy culture, dismantlingRacism.org. And these are just some of the, qualities of, our culture that we just assume. And one of them, and a couple of them I want to point out, for example, the sense of urgency. This, one of the things that's in really direct conflict is, this obsession with efficiency. There's time is money, and when you are embarking, what we found is when you're embarking on a more inclusive process, it takes time. It takes more time, and in the end, it's worth it. And you might argue it doesn't take any more time in the long run because you're really proceeding in a much more methodical and way that gathers all the inputs. So you're not doing a lot of back cycles, but we find this constant conflict. Another one, for example, is only one right way. This idea of best practices, that there's a way to do something, and sometimes that's tough because it doesn't allow the flexibility of thinking that gets to a better solution. Along the bottom, there is a Harvard implicit association test that you can take if you'd like, and this slide deck will be available, so you don't have to write anything down. But I would like to ask, what are some of your implicit biases? Maybe you could populate the chat with that, and we could share that way. I'll give you one of mine. Like when it comes to the time thing, that like I get offended when somebody is late for a meeting because I feel like they don't value my time. That's just like baked into my DNA. And not everybody has that same relationship with time, and they don't mean any disrespect, but that's one that I would add to the chat.
So I think a few things to think about in the planning and design process, and this is in no way to say that in Winooski we did this perfectly, because certainly when you're trying to have an inclusive process, it is fits and starts and bumpiness and kind of takes a lot more time than you probably think. I'm sure many of you have had that experience before in your communities, but it is important. To really make the effort to make it inclusive. It doesn't always mean that you're going to have the perfect level of diversity that you might want, but making the effort is important, and also documenting how you're doing that, and asking the hard to reach folks like what is the best way for us to include you, and so that you can be a part of this. And then leadership group, for us, we had what we called a capital project committee, and it was about 16 to 18 folks. And we put it out to the entire community, the staff, the students. We had parent and student representation. We had a lot of staff representation. We had city representation. And so I felt like we had a pretty good group, and, we published all that information. We had clear roles and responsibilities in the meetings, agendas, and all that kind of stuff, so we could document and we could share out all of that information, which sometimes you never know if people are following along or not, but providing it in a variety of ways through your communication channels is really important. What we found in terms of what worked best with students was to engage classes, like go to them with specific things. So David and Cam went and asked students, middle school students, to design their ideal classroom. And they used CAD and did 3D models, and they did sketches, and then they had a gallery for David and Cam to walk through and ask questions, and that was really powerful. And they actually gave them a binder of all of the designs, and you can actually see some of the things that students came up with had materialized in the construction. And then alternative ways to meet with people. I think what we found was this became particularly important, not necessarily in the planning and design, but kind of leading up to a bond vote, where we had evenings during the week, Saturday and Sunday mornings. We went to folks and said, when will this work best for you? So we didn't get in the way of cultural celebrations, of church gatherings and things like that. We coupled events with basketball games and sporting events and other things, so that while people were coming to the school, they could do what they came for, and they could take like a tour of the building and see all the stuff that needed repairs. Yeah.
And I think one of the questions we have here in the top right is what are the voices that are from your community that are not at the table when you think about it? I think a fundamental is in the third bullet, I guess, is a fundamental shift is a stakeholder model versus a shareholder model. Instead, and if you really want to get the voices of everybody, you have to meet with these people or use questionnaires, variety of ways to get input. And you're not just getting the shareholders, the leadership group's input, you're getting this larger group's input. And it's a shift, a mindset shift. And we did our very best, but in some cases, like a good example is we wanted to get student voices. So we went to the school and they recommended the student councils, right? Because they were formed, they're a leadership group. It was great. We got a lot of good input from them, but they are a self-selected group of high-functioning kids. And are you really getting, the widest representation of voices when you do that? So even when you try to do things right, sometimes you could do better, and that's what we're learning, I think, when as we proceeded through this process and all our projects.
Hey, David, can I respond to a question in the chat while we're
Sure.
going here?
Absolutely.
So it's fresh.
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
so Daniel asked, how did you decide on the members and the committees when you had multiple applications? So basically, myself and there were 2 board members that were designated by the full board to be the primary liaisons to the whole capital project. And so we sent out the opportunity. There was a very short application. We had a listing of all the roles, students, teachers in the different schools, support staff, leadership members, community members, parents, specific cultural groups, and so forth. And so when we got all of those, we didn't end up having to make a lot of decisions because we left the group numbers fairly large. But we had 2 or 3 cases. I think they were mostly for staff who wanted to be on it. And so we really, I went and kind of talked to principals and said, what else is this teacher or staff member involved in, and looked at their general capacity, kind of looked at what they could bring from past experiences to the committee if they had, experiences with capital before, or maybe had been in the industry or facilitation. And we just made a value judgment on those folks and what would bring the greatest value and diversity to the team.
Great. Thanks, Sean. And even the way you facilitate meetings can really affect getting as many voices heard as possible. And, one of the things we learned is, talk less and listen more. The more you're filling up the airspace, the less time other people have to contribute, who may not feel as empowered as we do. I think one of the things, with I would say white middle class people, especially males, is that you feel like your voice needs to be heard, and sometimes you don't realize that you think you have important things to say, but other people do too. And meetings have a finite time, and sometimes you can be crowding out others. So trying to make sure everyone who wants to speak has an opportunity is huge. One of the things we did with the kids was, instead of doing what we call popcorn, which is everybody just contributes, is that we would go around the room and go just let every kid have a turn to contribute. And that seemed to draw out their responses. Whereas when we didn't do that, you get certain voices that would dominate. There are different ways to facilitate meetings. I list a few here. There's versus Robert's rules. There's an alternative called Roberta's rules. This circle way I was describing, there's a more formal way of doing that. In Roberta's rules, they have some suggestions, like everyone speaks once before anyone speaks twice, and no one speaks more than twice. So it's really important, even now you've got your stakeholder model, you've got the right people in the room, how the meeting is facilitated can really make a difference. So we want to talk specifically about Winooski schools and give you some examples. So Sean, I'll let you kick this off.
Yeah, I mean, the reason that this all kind of came about was the building had been kind of patched together, several projects every 10 to 12 years, and the systems were incoherent, and we were growing in students and staff. So you can kind of see some of those bullets, like those were some of the more tangible things that we really wanted to create the opportunities for in the future through the design and through the actual construction. And I would just add, like, team-based learning. We were grade level teams, middle school teams. We wanted to make sure that there was some flexibility, that there was proximity So you get both the formal and the informal ability to collaborate with teachers and also various service providers like multilingual, special ed, speech language, clinicians, social workers, and so forth. So that was a real kind of aim in the process to design and then to construct.
So, you know, we talked about time. The planning started in 2018. We had a project manager, a project architect. There was a bond vote in 2019. And, you know, one of the things that really threw a monkey wrench into this whole process was COVID, because all of a sudden our access to stakeholders became very limited. And so we had to get very creative in terms of how we reached them and how we presented materials. Everything went to Zoom. And that really was difficult. And plus the owner, the school district had, as everybody knows, who experienced this, had their hands full just trying to cope with keeping the school running. Construction started in June of 2020 and it was completed in 2022, which you know, and definitely there were some COVID related delays.
Yeah, so just to describe a little bit of process, you know, David and Cam and their team came in and did what they call visioning workshops. And you can see a picture there, like we had tons of people from the community. They came in and David and Cam had a great process to walk people through. You know, it was a very kind of clear process and protocol. It was very collaborative. You can see everybody sitting in groups, you know, staff, parents, community members, city officials, administrators, and all different folks. And what really came out of that was some clear themes about what all stakeholders really thought that we needed. And certainly we were able to provide like some data to them, you know, demographic data, modeling of the future and growth and everything that drove some of those themes. But there was also kind of some, I think, kind of community beliefs that arose that we kind of knew were out there, but they were almost more solidified through this process. Like, you know, our community is really interested in whole child development, not just academic. They want to make sure that all aspects of children are tended to. They understood the importance of creating a building that is healthy, has fresh air, natural light. You know, staff in particular were very strong about, we want to have colors and we want to have spaces that promote, you know, calmness, tranquility, self-regulation. And we want to have a lot of space where we can celebrate all the great student learning and display that in different places. And in particular, you know, the community is very welcoming in so many ways to so many different people, and they wanted that to be kind of an opening statement, you know, which really led to a lot of the design you'll see later in the presentation, so that it's a welcoming environment and that it's a community asset, not just a school building for 8 to 3. Cam?
Well, I was just going to add, you know, that from my perspective, having sat through this, you know, a couple of these, particularly the student-centered approach that promotes calmness and tranquility, and the focus on a welcoming environment with community integration and access, I believe that those two guiding principles came directly out of the inclusive process, and that those concerns were raised up by the particular group of people who were assembled to talk about what needed to be the guideposts for the project. So I think that that's a direct impact on the end product from inclusiveness.
The other thing I'd add to that is it was really helping. This is kind of like a paraphrasing of the guiding principles, but we had 4 very clear guiding principles, and we actually used those throughout the project. We came into our 3rd bid package, COVID had hit, supply chain was changing, labor market was changing, and so we were over budget, and we had to look and make really difficult decisions about reducing aspects of the project, and we used the guiding principles to make those decisions. And then there were several times throughout the project where we had to make some hard, financial decisions. And we always went back to these guiding principles, which really helped us to get clarity about what the right thing to do was.
Yeah, thanks for making that point, because that's a really, they were very powerful, and keeping the project's goals aligned with the values of the community. So I want to start talking about some of the features of the project. These are some that I've listed here. There's the town square concept, team-based learning, all of these things. We'll go through each one. The theme through these, a lot of those, is how do we create a sense of belonging, a sense of community, both, and that's multiple levels. So it's not just the whole school as one community, but it's like the elementary school, the middle school, the high school as 3 separate communities. And then within that, we have the teams. So the idea is how do we create places where kids feel they're part, that helps them feel part of a community of people, and included. The other thing I think that was really fascinating conversation was this issue of equity, and that and almost one of the principles that wasn't really put in here but almost became a design principle was that the kids with the highest needs should have the best spaces. Often we're making closets into guidance counselor's office or school-based clinicians, and we're converting all these small spaces. We need a therapeutic program, and we have some, a leftover space. And this was an opportunity to kind of turn that on its head and really think about what these kids needed, and do it in a way that wasn't stigmatizing, but also like, making sure there was natural light, and that it was in a place that felt like equitable for everybody. And it was a challenge, but it was a great challenge. So we'll go through each one of these and give you some examples of inclusivity and equitable design.
Yeah, so I guess many of you are probably familiar with Brown's work, breaking ranks, and schools within schools, and so some of that is applicable here. For us, if you look at the bottom right, the elementary school, those areas were pods, and that's new build. And so the concept there, and that some of them were similar at the top left in the middle school area, we wanted to create kind of all-inclusive areas where there was space to move between classrooms, open walls, to go out into common spaces, to have students working in groups, in little spaces, in those diagonal spaces, and also have places where special educators, speech language pathologists, multilingual folks could come right in and meet the kids in those areas. For us, the elementary, the school within the school is like grade level. And then in the middle school, there is a 6th grade team. And then there are 2 grade 7-8 teams. And then at the high school level, it's really more around advisory, or those kind of smaller communities within the school.
And in each, one of the things about creating community is, one of the ways architecture can help is by creating places for people to gather. And in each school, there's a hub space that is essentially a place where you can gather either, can be used for a social space, could be used for small group learning, it could be used to bring project teams in. So each, it creates like a heart for each school, a sort of social center that helps once again create community. I'll show you one of these spaces. This space here is in the high school, and this is the high school hub, and so it's got areas for socialization on the bottom floor. We've got this learning stair, which can be used for presentations. It can be used for studying, and then on the top there's seminar rooms that can be used for small group instruction and group projects. So what we did was we took a classroom out in the middle of the block and created this structure. And so this is now the hub of the high school.
You'll be interested to know that the high school students have nicknamed that area Machu Picchu. Which now we're wondering whether we need to kind of like lay out the whole building in a way, with like street names and geography and landforms, across the entire building. So
Sean, you could from the lobby to the middle school could be the Inca Trail,
right?
And,
right.
That'd be really funny. So this is drilling down. I mentioned community at the whole school level, at the each section, elementary, middle, high, and now we're drilling down into a middle school team. And you can see where it says commons, because Winooski has a team-based approach to learning. We created these pods that have these common areas that allow for, once again, as I was mentioning earlier, you can have small group learning, you can have morning meeting, but it also, by having this self-contained area, it creates a sense of identity and community for that team. So we did this in new construction for middle school and elementary, and then you'll see right in the center, at the very heart where the hub is the support services. So there was a lot of conversation. Should they be, off to the side? Where should they be? And the school felt really strongly that they should be right in the heart, right in the hub, so that they, because it was that important. This is a view. I apologize. This is not a professional photograph, but this is one of the middle school hub spaces, and you can see what we did was we popped, because it's a interior space, we popped the roof up to get natural light in, because as you recall from or you may recall from the guiding principles, natural light was a real driver in terms of the design. We wanted to get natural light into as many spaces as possible.
Yeah, so the community spaces and services, this was a really, really driving element. Because in our prior building, what we found, just because of limited space, we had a lot of the folks kind of operated as district, serving families and students all over the building, which creates not only potential confusion, it also can create safety and security issues. And so this is kind of the one-stop shop, or the town center model, where you come through the door and you have a really beautiful, open, airy, well-lit lobby. And then to your left, you have kind of the entry to the middle high school, as well as the health office and school-based health center. And you have the multilingual liaisons right there, a store. And then to the right, you have the elementary school. So you can kind of go to either school. So if parents come in and they have multiple children and across the different schools, they have access to those offices really easily. And then, the spaces that get used by everybody, including community members, like the library, the cafeteria, and the Performing Arts Center and the gym, are all very close, so that it's easy and accessible for families, for visitors that are coming into the building. And also we have the ability through our security systems and everything to cordon off parts of the building depending on what the activities of the evening or the day might be.
This is once again a construction photo, but pretty close to the end of the lobby. So it's what you see in front of you. There's a cafe. There's a basic needs store where they have like a food pantry and winter clothes. And on your right is the library. So this is just gives you a feel for the space. There's a lot of natural light coming in from above. It's really quite lovely.
Yeah, so in addition to the what we call the necessity store, as David described, where we have pantry and clothing available, when I first got to Winooski in 2013, it was very apparent in the first year that we were either going to rely on outside agencies to provide the resources to fill in the basic needs of our families, or we were going to do it ourselves. And we decided we were going to do it ourselves, as our theory of action was to increase readiness to learn. And so a big part of that is health, making sure that students are fed throughout the day. And so, in addition to being a part of the community eligibility provision and backpack programs, fresh fruits and vegetables programs, all that stuff we do, we have the necessity store. And then another big part of that is the school-based health center. So we had a remarkably small health office. It was really criminal, frankly, where our 2 full-time nurses are seeing over 100 students a day. And so we created this health center where we have a dental chair in there now. We have a hygienist who will soon be coming to do cleanings with students. We have pediatricians who come 3 days a week. And we have 2 pediatric practices that cover about 90% of our families. So they already know students. They can bill directly from providing service on our campus. And just the space for our own nurses to be able to do their work. So this is a really, really beautiful space. And, we're continuing to follow the data and see how this plays out in terms of attendance and academic growth for our students.
Thanks, Sean. Another aspect of the design that was driven by the guiding principles was this idea of spaces that help student emotionally regulate. And we actually were able to find a white paper called The Inclusive Classroom. And basically, they talked about the studies that they have done showed that natural colors of nature were very soothing. So greens and blues and grays. And so that became the theme, the color theme for the entire project. And we worked and we modified those for each school. So the high school was a little more mature, a little darker, and then it got more fun and a little more playful as we got to the elementary school, but all within the same theme. And I think it's been, it looks great. Whether, it's hard to say whether it's having its desired effect, but I think in general, people are really enjoying it. And, you'll see some schools, and I'm not saying there's a right or wrong, but there are some designers who will go with bright, it's like the play school colors, the primary colors and really exciting fun. And that might be right for some schools. For this school, though, terms of helping them with their goals, this was the approach that we took. And so I think it's just, really, it really affects, when you put this lens on the design process, it really affects all aspects.
So safety and security. So we really wanted to balance safety and security with welcoming, being a welcoming community, because we've always prided ourselves on that. And, in today's world where there's a lot of strong movement to harden schools, we're just really trying to strike the balance. So, we have cameras on the outside of the building. We have some cameras in the inside of the building. We do have the double lock entryway. We're currently working on a kind of an electronic visitor management system. And so I feel like we are very safe and secure. And at the same time, we have plenty of people right out front, that are there for visitors when they come right in, that we can still make people feel welcome. I think the front of the building and the design with the colors and our logo and the name also makes it very welcoming. But it wasn't necessarily a guiding principle, but it was really important to us that we fulfill that responsibility to having a safe and secure building, and we maintain a high level of welcoming to anybody who comes to the school.
And I think one of the things, the security consultant brought out, which was that, a heavy security presence, whether it's a police car, uniformed officer, cameras, doesn't make everybody feel more safe. In underrepresented groups, traditionally marginalized groups, those don't make them feel more secure, they make them feel less secure. So the security consultants were really focused, or they helped us understand that, what Sean's talking about this balance is that when you harden a building and you operationally, do things like have uniformed police officers, all that, you have to be aware that it doesn't feel more safe for everybody. And that was definitely an aha moment for us as we worked on this project.
Yeah, David, I would just add, none of those pictures are actually from Winooski.
Yeah.
We
Right.
do have a school resource officer who is situated at the very front of the building, and he wears a soft uniform. He drives an unmarked car, and that's been something, that has happened just in the last couple of years, and has very clear kind of procedures to how he does his work, both in a response, from a response, emergency response, and kind of a prevention approach, and going into classrooms and working on safe walking routes to school, crossing streets, biking, and all that kind of stuff. We don't have metal detectors in the building, and stop there.
I was just going to add, because I think one of the things we like to talk about is the notion that a building speaks for the community, whether you intend it to or not, right? So one place where this came to roost was we were discussing what does the transaction window look like at the front entry when people come in to get credentialed. And you have kind of a choice, right? You can have like a slide, you can have an opening with nothing, you can have a slider window, or you can have, a bulletproof transaction window with a deal tray and a speaker in the middle of it. And all of those things say something different, whether you intend them to or not. And if you're going to put a deal tray at the front door, when the first thing someone sees when they come to you is they're speaking through a speaker, and there's a deal tray, and there's no actual physical, we're not even breathing the same air as these people, that is not welcoming. And so, I think that this and it feels like you're buying cigarettes on the New Jersey Turnpike in the middle of the night, so it's, I think that interplay is super important and something that is valuable for all schools, but particularly ones with a very diverse population.
Yeah, I wonder, David, I'm not sure about time here. I wonder if people have questions that we want to give some time for. Not, we're already at 1:15, I think.
Yeah, let's, I think that's a great idea. Why don't we open it? I mean, there's just a few slides left. I think we can, but I think people are generally getting the idea of what, both from a context, process, and design features, and obviously these will be available. So why don't we take a few questions, see if there's any questions, as we're about a quarter of.
Martine, you have a question?
I'm not sure if somebody has to oh, there we go.
I do. Yeah, thank you so much. Senator Gulick here. I'm phoning in from Montpelier, and I actually just got a question today here in the State House. I'm also on the Burlington School Board, and someone was asking me about, ADA and ADA compliance, accessibility, and universal design. Specifically, they were talking about a design feature that we have in our future high school that is a large staircase in the lobby, I believe, that has sort of landing platforms or spaces where students can gather. And they really saw that as problematic. So I'm just wondering if generally, if you want to speak to that, but also generally how you incorporated universal design in this project, and if you could give us any words of advice on how to make that as best as it could possibly be. Thanks.
Sure, I can start. We often, there's the spirit of ADA, and then there's sort of the letter of the law. And sometimes I think people focus on, oh, what are the regulations? What do we have to, what requirements do we have to meet? And I think in a case like this staircase, it's like, do you want to create a space that some people can't access? And often in those, and so that's the question I think the school has to ask themselves, is that consistent with their values, whether or not it's allowable by the regulations. In terms of the Winooski project, we were, it's basically, except for the high school wing, which is 2 stories, it's all 1 floor. So we didn't have a lot of that, those issues, but the ziggurat or the Machu Picchu feature, somebody who is is disabled cannot climb up onto and sit on there, and it's just the nature of that. But so it's a really good point. Sometimes when you're trying to create interesting creative designs, you may not always be able to accommodate everybody. But I think what I would say is always focus on what the spirit of, like the guiding principles. If one of your guiding principles is spaces that are accessible to all, or if that's somehow incorporated, then you have to think about not just what the regulations say, but what you're trying to achieve.
I would add a couple of things that, you know, in the case of the Winooski School, this learning stair feature has a big open space on the first floor and a big open space on the second floor that are adjacent to it. So people can occupy that space, and people could even transfer onto the learning stair if they wanted to from a wheelchair at that lower level. But from a broad spectrum look at this school, we did what we would call barrier-free design, which means that every restroom, every classroom, every occupied space is accessible. There might be one or two very tiny restrooms that couldn't be completely accessible, but they're adaptable is what we would call them. And the idea there is that you don't have to move a kid from one classroom to, you don't have to move the classrooms to the kid with a disability. A child with a disability or who's physically limited can occupy any part of the school. And of course, they can't engage with the actual stairs, but they can be in the space with their friends. So.
Thank you very much.
I think I saw that Randy Lowe had a question.
I was not going to ask my question, but now I will, now that you identified that my hand was up and then I brought it down. I was curious, Sean, about how you, once your committee had met and you had had all the meetings, how did you communicate most effectively with the rest of the community to bring them along to the work and help to, you know, garner support for the project in the bond vote?
Yeah, I think we saw the capital project committee as a set of ambassadors, and you know, we had them as all kind of roles of stakeholders. And so we made it very clear to people, like, we want you to incorporate this into your conversations, you know, in the neighborhoods, at the basketball games, in your, you know, your reading club, all that kind of stuff. And I think people did that. We also sent it out and posted it everywhere. And I think what was most effective was inviting people into the building and having a very quick presentation on kind of guiding principles and the needs, and then going around and showing people and having the experts. So we had Dave, Cam, and others who could really talk about the systems in great detail and why they were not sufficient, and, you know, the life of them. And you know, we could show people the buckets full of water from that day. I mean, it was really compelling, I think, for people to go through the building and have specific things pointed out, and then also to show them some renderings of what it could be, you know, at the end. And that's kind of how we sequenced those tours, and I think those were the most effective.
Any other questions or comments?
There was a question far back about how is it decided how much space was enough? And I guess this was a question that came through with the registrations. You know, the sizing of schools is a little bit of a dark art, but you know, what we do is we actually interview all the stakeholders in the school, and without prejudging, we ask them, what are the activities that you do? Who is it that you work with most? And then we go through and we size each individual space based on the activities. And that's kind of how you arrive at the size school that you need. It's kind of a rote exercise, but that's how we do it. We actually look at the activities planned and how much space those take. So. If no one else has anything else, I would just add one thing. You know, we're architects, and we're not experts in inclusivity. We're not experts in diversity, but we are experts in building design. And you know, the Winooski School District really had their act together in terms of being sensitive to the different populations, understanding who was in their community. And they brought a lot of expertise and sensitivity to the process. And that really helped us do our job and do it effectively. And, so I would encourage the, school districts out there to consider what their district looks like, who the people are that are in the community, and and be broad in your thinking, because so much of the time DE&I issues are reduced to racial or gender issues, but they're also socioeconomic, level of education, ethnicity, background, place of origin. There's just so many things, and I think that there's probably a pretty robust exploration that could be had in any school district around these issues. And I think it would improve the next generation of school facilities if we all had that same kind of sensitivity.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of these ideas are applicable, not just with building design, but with, I'm on the board of Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility, and a lot of the meeting agreements and way that we hold meetings have changed as we've tried to create a more inclusive process. And I think it's really, understanding things like an inclusive process requires time, that you have to focus on stakeholders, not shareholders, and you have to really understand where you're coming from, what your life experiences have been, and that may be different from the people that you're working with, and really focusing, like, the idea that it's not just that with coming back to design right now, it's not just the final design, but it's the process that gets you there. It's really the process that is, the transmission that gets this thing moving in the right direction. And that includes both the stakeholder model, but also the meeting facilitation. And it's really, I think in the end, it's about listening. It's about getting the right people at the table and really listening to what they have to say, and understanding what those needs are, if we're designing in this way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would add, we haven't talked at all about finances, which obviously is really, really important in this, and is things are increasingly expensive. But I would just say a few things: that it is very important to work closely with all the folks, whether it's the bond bank, your bond counsel, your finance manager, the estimators, to have good numbers early on, always with kind of disclaimers of market conditions and escalation costs and all that kind of stuff. But, that's what people want to know. And you've got to be able to provide that from the beginning. And I think also articulating that you're going to, turn every stone to try and find dollars to offset as much of the impact onto taxpayers. We were fortunate enough to be able to use about $4 million of ESSER funds to the HVAC. And we were fortunate enough to get a USDA loan for a maximum of 2.25% on the 30-year note, which is going to save the community like $19 million over the life of the 30-year note, relative to the original modeling that we had, which was like 3.8%. So really having a group of people that really know that stuff and are on top of it as conditions change, and be able to articulate it publicly, is really important.
Great. Well, we're at time, folks. We will make this recording and the slide deck available. I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank Sean and Cam and everybody, and Tracy, for helping make this happen. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Sean or I, and we'd be happy to answer those. So thank you very much.